Hello. I'm Colonel Brown. I'm Staff Judge Advocate at Cyber Command. I'm sorry I wasn't with you this morning. I know there have been some nasty rumors going around about why I wasn't here this morning. So I'm going to give a little multiple choice quiz and let you decide which one is correct. A would be I was the victim of cyberbullying, which we're very concerned about. B would be I was just trying to see if I was only getting by on my good looks now, so we'll definitely find out. C would be this is what happens to you when you work at Cyber Command. Well, yeah, I'm going to eliminate one of the choices right away with the introduction of our next speaker, because it could be like this working at Cyber Command. But as those of you who are in the military, if you've ever stood up a new command, you'll realize that one of the key people that makes it successful when you stand up a new command and makes it not so painful and not so ugly is the Chief of Staff. And our next speaker is the Chief of Staff at Cyber Command, Rear Admiral Peg Klein. She has she has a very impressive biography, which is in your book. She served numerous operational assignments, as you'll see, including command of an expeditionary strike group. But for our purposes, and certainly for the purposes of the Cyber Command Legal Office and those of us who are assigned to Cyber Command, she's taken on the incredible challenge of straightening up all the organizational pieces of Cyber Command, along with learning cyber operations like we've all had to do, a brand new area. So incredible challenge. She's done a great job. It's my pleasure to introduce Admiral Klein.
So first of all, thank you very much publicly to the Naval War College for the offer to co-sponsor this conference. Professor Schmidt, it was great being able to listen to you. And Gary came to my office about 4 months ago. A little bit of background. Gary came to me about 4 months ago and said, hey, I've gotten this tremendous offer to co-sponsor this conference, internationally recognized. We only need, X amount of money. And I said, heck, with the millions of dollars we have in unfunded requirements, what's a little bit more? Because we didn't have a J8. We were very, very new. And so this was a tremendous opportunity, and I was very happy that we were able to, bring our share of the resources forward along with the many other folks who helped back this. But it's a tremendous opportunity. And I have a lot of work for you to do. So let me get on with my comments. Thanks, Admiral Christensen. Thanks very much for the opportunity for me to speak. Now, you'll notice nowhere in my biography does it say anything about law, except that I've had some fantastically gifted lawyers working for me, and that includes the current crop of lawyers and SJAs that work in the office. We have close to a dozen SJAs, and you would think, so the green eye shade people would come forward and would say, why do you need all those lawyers? The command's only this old, it's very young, and there's not even 1,000 of you in the command. And I will tell you, it's because of all the questions that you all raised just in the first few hours of conversation. It's the fact that there are operational issues yet for them to look at. We need them to be able to reach out to not only to all the services, but to the interagency and then to the international group of folks. So there's a handful of them, more than you would think of. By comparison, we have one public affairs officer. I have one legislative liaison officer. But you can tell that when we stood up the command, Gary and others, who is a plank owner in the command, understood the need to discuss this subject very deeply. And in addition, we have several people like Eric Greenwald who have law as a background, even though they are serving as our future operations officer. So in my time, I want to talk to you about several aspects of cyberspace and the progress of U.S. Cyber Command and the larger cyber enterprise. Cyberspace, as you all know, without even thinking about it, is a defining feature of modern life. Individuals and communities worldwide connect, socialize, organize, and bank in and through cyberspace. The United States relies on access to cyberspace for its national and economic security. Modern forces, from a military perspective, cannot conduct effective operations without reliable access to cyberspace. However, this new feature of modern life presents new challenges on multiple levels. We'll start with the technical jargon that accompanies it. When I heard the first speaker, I said, after Admiral Christensen, when I heard the first speaker started, and they started with JFCCNW and JTFTNO, I said, oh, please, you're going to put people to sleep. But that's just a couple of organizational acronyms. That's not even the technical jargon outside the legal profession. That's not the technical jargon that's used to describe cyber as a domain. So that's incredibly challenging. Then you throw in each service has their own acronyms, and because we're so new, none of them are standardized, so you really have to learn 4 or 5 different languages just to be able to carry on a conversation in the halls of Cyber Command. Operators face technical challenges in addition. They face technical challenges of operating and conducting military actions in cyberspace. Lawmakers and scholars alike confront new questions on how existing law should be applied to military actions, including warfare, in cyberspace. The legal community must also determine how new laws and policies should be crafted to fit this rapidly evolving domain. The current state of cyber law, or lack thereof, if previous speakers are to be understood, and the lack of clear legal guidance is comparable to previous time periods when other new technologies were introduced into society. The first example is the early 19th century. The telegraph raised the potential legal issue of infringing on the sovereignty of a neutral nation by sending information over a telegraph. Early in the 20th century, the airplane transitioned from a mode of being able to get quickly from point A to point B to a warfighting system or a weapon system that made a fundamental difference in warfighting. Cyber is a new technology that merges many national security components, 2 of which are espionage and warfighting. Cyberspace is regularly used to conduct espionage, as we heard mentioned several times this morning. That same medium can potentially be used to deliver serious physical effects. This presents significant legal and policy challenges to legal scholars and practitioners, as technology frequently outpaces the decisions on how to regulate that technology. Now, if you worked for General Alexander, he'd say something witty but be deadly serious, and that would be, you got 3.5 hours, I expect you to have a good product for me, solving at least 50% of these problems by about 1700. So I think we're going to give you 3 days to solve many of these problems, so we're waiting with bated breath to see how you do on those problems. Let me talk a little bit about legal challenges, or deep dive on a couple of the legal challenges. And so these are questions I'm asking you. So when I open it up for questions later on, you don't get to ask me the same questions back. Scholars and attorneys face a variety of complex legal issues: geography, sovereignty, lexicon, and privacy issues. The actual structure of cyberspace presents the first challenge: the multiple layers of cyberspace: persona, cyber persona, logical, physical network layers, and then the geographic layer. And most are very comfortable in law and operations on the geographic layer and the persona layer. And folks that speak regularly about cyber to the public address geography and personas as bookends around the technology that exists, and it really does visually describe how we are comfortable with some parts of cyber and very uncomfortable with other parts of cyber. All these layers present the question of where to apply the legal construct in this domain. Should it be based on geography or where the machines are located? Should it be at the persona layer, where the actor is located? Should it be a combination of those two or many of the other layers, physical, network, etc.? So that's your first question to answer. So where do you apply law? Which of these layers do you have to choose? Is it, as Gary says, a multiple choice test, or is there one right answer? Are there multiple right answers? While many questions currently remain unanswered, some basic principles do exist First and foremost, military non-intelligence cyber operations should follow the same rule as operations conducted in the kinetic world. And I think you heard that from a couple of the speakers this morning. Modern warfare follows the just war tradition. Cyber warfare should align with these principles. And it's true that this tradition is challenged in cyberspace because of the difficulty in applying the law in cyberspace. For example, one of the questions we deal with frequently, what is a use of force in cyberspace? Death, injury, and physical damage are considered a use of force, but what level of damage in cyberspace would qualify as a use of force? And subsequently, when would a use of force, a use for force, rise to an armed attack, thus invoking the right to self-defense? So that probably is a good 1700 assignment for you all. Often, cyber actions are only disruptive. We talked a lot this morning about espionage, may or may not be even disruptive, and maybe they're not destructive. So self-defense would likely not apply. So then, how do you determine the appropriate response? If the action falls below the use of force, then cyber countermeasures, taken in a proportionate manner, are permitted under international law. Taking a countermeasure leads to a new set of legal questions. For instance, attribution. What role does attribution play in taking a countermeasure or defensive action? How much attribution is needed to take an action in defense? Can an action be taken if the actor is not identified? If the threat is coming from a presumably neutral or innocent third-party state, then what action should we be able to take to stop the effect being inflicted on our systems? How does sovereignty impact our ability to take an action? Attorneys will address such issues as the reach of sovereignty and its outer limits when conducting a cyber operation. Further, can we hold a state responsible for preventing such events from originating from their territory? The identity of the combatant is also muddled in cyberspace because the ease of entry into cyberspace allows many players onto the battlefield, adding further complexity to this already intertwined domain. If the cyber actors are not combatants, but simply ordinary citizens, it becomes more difficult to characterize their actions. Is it crime? Is it an act of terrorism? Is it an intelligence action? Or is it a military action? And who should take action? Our command will conduct cyber operations in compliance with the law of armed conflict. The law of armed conflict, jus in bello, requires distinction when analyzing a target. Distinction accounts for the protection of people and places who are combatants or who are not combatants or do not have a military necessity. However, in cyberspace, applying the rule of distinction becomes more difficult as most, if not all, targets are dual use, with both civilian, personal, and military commands using the same infrastructure. Targets can include the electrical grid, communication systems, or transportation systems. Assessing the collateral damage from a cyber action must be assessed per international law, however, if the response is a sub-use of force response. Then how should the ancillary effects from that action be analyzed if no legal doctrine exists to assess that type of consequence? Which is why we have almost 12 attorneys on our staff to get cracking on that legal doctrine. Finally, in this area, we must perform our work ever mindful of our responsibility to safeguard the privacy and civil liberties of all U.S. persons. We must ensure that defending DoD's networks and the nation's freedom of action in cyberspace does not infringe on the civil liberties of Americans. These are just a few of the complex questions that attorneys and scholars must address in the near term. There's an additional challenge for both legal and policymakers. Cyberspace requires interagency, inter-service, and international cooperation. Cyber Command, as well as a diverse set of other agencies and organizations, including DHS, FBI, and the other DOS, not the DDoS, work in concert to address the issues in this complex environment. Many of these entities have different priorities as well as initiatives with government, industry, and allied partners. Coordinating their interests and authorities to accomplish their respective missions is key, and they are, in most cases, intertwined. The legal community can assist in interpreting and sorting out these matters. So those are many, many of the legal challenges. I now want to talk to you about some of the practical challenges of conducting cyber operations. So significant practical considerations, and that is in addition to the legal challenges of working in the interagency and in the international forum. Each operational military domain has unique features that require military operations conform to the physical or relational demands. Doctrine, tactics, techniques, and procedures have been under development for long periods of time for land and maritime domains. They've been in effect for almost a century in the air domain and for decades in space. And while all those seem a long time, cyber is relatively new on the horizon. For cyber, we're at the beginning of doctrine and tactics, techniques, and procedure development, and we can't move fast enough. More challenges lay in front of law and policy makers, as well as operators in the creation of these subjects. Cyber Command continues to work on developing doctrine for a proactive, agile force that can maneuver in cyberspace at the speed of the internet. Because after all, like any other military command, we conduct significant planning effort, and our reason for being is to offer options. And without a legal framework, it is a challenge to offer those options. We're also looking for ways in which adversaries might seek to exploit our weaknesses. From the operational standpoint, we strive to establish a single, integrated, repeatable process to align the combatant command requirements with cyberspace capabilities. We also have to develop functional focuses in the service cyber components. There is a service cyber component subordinate to U.S. Cyber Command from each of the services, plus the Coast Guard. We also must draft joint cyber operations, a cyber operations field manual, so there is a uniform set of standards, tactics, techniques, and procedures for the services to line up behind. And then we have to demonstrate that not only doctrine, but our tactics, techniques, and procedures work, and that they work consistently, and that they work across multiple examples. So that's the first, that's doctrine. Global visibility is the next area. We need the ability to see threats that are directed at our networks or perhaps just happen to be flowing by. Our commanders and our services need to know what's happening inside our networks, because quite frequently our networks are an integral part of the warfighting platform. Our challenge is to develop a definitive picture of our DoD networks, which have been numbered at 15,000 different enclaves, and understand at a moment's notice what is happening as it's occurring. In addition to understanding what's happening on our networks, in order to fulfill our mission, we have to be able to understand in real time what's happening on the internet around us, just as in my home service in the Navy, just like you would never go to sea and only look around your own ship to understand how well prepared you are to fight in the environment that you happen to be in. We would not develop a TTP that started with the skin of the ship and worked our way in. So we have to understand the overall cyber environment, both in and outside the United States. This requires unity of effort across the whole government, and that includes our interagency partners, the whole of DoD, Homeland Security, FBI, private partners, our allies across the globe, and with the goal of developing faster, more comprehensive, and timely warnings of the threats to DoD networks and to critical infrastructure, with the ultimate goal of creating integrated operational responses in cyberspace. So that's visibility. One of our additional challenges is trained and ready personnel. So the people that operate in these multiple layers, use this lexicon that is largely incomprehensible, have skills that take months or years to build upon, much like it takes months and years and decades to build a strike group commander such as Admiral Christensen before he came here. We don't just pluck one of those people off the street and expect them to be able to operate. We grow them over decades. At present, we're short of the skills and skilled people we as a command and a nation require to manage our networks with all their unique characteristics and then to protect U.S. interests in cyberspace. We in DoD need to build a cyber workforce that can take action quickly across the full range of our mission sets as necessary. Building this force will require the proper balance of skills. This would be made up of a proper balance of leaders, technical experts, and intelligence professionals. Our workforce at Cyber Command, I mentioned we're about 1,000 people. We're about half civilian, half military. On the military side, we have a pretty good spread of intel specialists and communications experts, and we are trying to grow an additional demand signal for line officers from all the services to also be involved in the ground floor. So this is not some esoteric intelligence problem that line officers don't understand till they've been operational for a couple decades. We should adopt one standard across the department and the services so we can operate as a single joint force, because this is a joint fight. Finally, the force must be capable of full spectrum operations across a continuum of threats, and one that is capable of defending not only the department, but if called upon, defend the nation in cyberspace. Finally, we have to build within the department a more defensible architecture that can serve as an operational platform for the DoD cyberspace enterprise. If you were to go across the department and take an informal survey of who thought networks were warfighting platforms and who thought that they were just a business platform, you'd get a pretty interesting spread of responses. As you probably well understand, probably more than I, because my background is very much geared towards aviation, it is very difficult to untangle those networks that are used solely for warfighting platforms and those that are used for many other purposes. So consolidating the architecture within the Department of Defense by reducing the number of DoD enclaves, using a cloud-based infrastructure, better managing our data, and better access controls will reduce the attack surface at which our adversaries can affect. It'll also help us build that trained and ready cyber force, because we'll be able to put people to work not on just what we have, but on what we think we should have. This will allow us to successfully fulfill our mission to defend DoD and the nation in cyberspace. Okay, thanks, Gary.